Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Unseen Paranormal. Hope everyone had a great holiday break. I had a nice little vacation from the paranormal and celebrated the holidays on my birthday, but now I'm ready to get back to it. So let's get to today's guest. So today we're chatting with cryptozoology writer, researcher, and author of Beasts of Britain, Andy McGrath. Andy has been researching cryptid reports around the UK for over 25 years and has compiled many of these stories and eyewitness accounts into his book, Beasts of Britain. The book's available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and at his website, beastsofbritain.com. You can also find Andy on all the social medias and check out his YouTube channel, Beast of Britain, and hit that subscribe button. Hey, Andy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So you are, like your book says, Beast of Britain. You're from the UK. So
yeah,
modern technology is wonderful. We get to talk across long distances and not worry about phone signals. We're actually using Skype, which gives us really good, quality.
Skype.
Yeah. It's kind of become a Skype world. We were talking before recording here about the whole COVID thing, and it's kind of become a Skype Zoom world.
It is. My whole year, that first year, 2020, was spent on Zoom and Skype and Teams. Right, that was my whole life.
Yeah, and your YouTube show, you use those programs as well to do your Beast of Britain YouTube show.
Yeah, I have a little Beastly Theories, a little chant called Beastly Theories, which is, again, it's a low-key, low-tech, low-key, low-brow endeavor. That's how I describe it, to just discuss the highs and lows of cryptozoology research with like-minded people.
Yeah, I've enjoyed watching quite a few of the episodes and got some interesting guests on there, and of course on the show here, I just like to have a natural conversation, so I enjoy other shows like that instead of kind of the scripted stuff. Just let the conversation go where it goes, and we'll just dive in and talk about some cryptids. One of the big question that I always ask everybody, just because I find everybody's story is interesting, everybody's story is different. How did you get into cryptids and come to write the book?
Cryptids I got into when I was a teenager, a young teenager, I think. And when I started to write the book in 2016, I said it was 25 years I've been doing it. And that was about approximate to me. I thought that's about right at that point. Well, I didn't have an actual date in my mind. It was that kind of period. I loved watching the In Search of program with Leonard Nimoy, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, and getting really intrigued by the possibility that these animals, and that's what I think they are, these animals might still exist undiscovered somewhere in the world. And it was like just a genuine boy's interest in a way. I collected newspaper clippings. I recorded things from the television or radio whenever little Loch Ness sightings came out, or Ogopogo or anything like that, any Bigfoot sightings, and just kept it there in the background, keeping this interest going. In the meantime, I was a singer, a musician for many, many, many years, and eventually settled down in London, got married, had children, worked a sort of a 50-hour week, 3-hour a day commute job in central London for 7 years. And eventually, me and my wife would save some money, and we said, well, why don't we, do something here? Why don't we do something with our passions and use some of this money to have some time away from this dragging work schedule? And she said, what about this monsters thing you're always talking about? What about your monsters? Why don't you do something with that? And initially I said, maybe I'll write a TV series. And a friend of mine who was in TV said, no, write a book first, it'll be protected. And another American friend of mine had said something in the past about, all you guys have is Loch Ness there in Britain. That's your one, that's your thing. And you couldn't possibly prove there's anything else. And I thought, okay, so there's a challenge. Why not look at Britain first? That's where you're from. It's the area you know and understand best. And I just started writing this book. And Beast of Britain, the name just always came to me straight away overnight, just popped into my head. And I started researching what else could be here apart from Nessie. And it was amazing. Some of the folklore, some of the stories like British Bigfoot stories, woodwows and even dogmen stories, things like that, which were very curious. I'd heard of werewolf legends, but I never imagined that people were claiming to see dogmen in this modern day and
Right.
age in the UK. This was surely this is the realm of folklore, not people actually getting on to, I don't know, a chat page or contacting researchers and saying, I've seen a 7-foot tall wolfman walking through the center of Hull eating an Alsatian or a German Shepherd. So that's how it all came about. I started writing it. I published the first version in 2017. It was my first book, so it had some flaws. And I'd been interviewing the whole way along. I did about 100 interviews by the time the book was finished, talking about writing the book. And then it did reasonably well. I did a second version of it in 2019, and then a final version of it in 2021 recently when I signed with Hanger One Publishing, which I think is a definitive, most academic possible version there could be, and started writing a new book series, which I've just about to publish the first volume of, which is called Beasts of the World. So yeah, it's been going swimmingly. People seem to be getting into it bit by bit, and I just hope it keeps growing.
Yeah, I love the book because being in the U.S. especially, and I know a lot of the cryptozoology stuff comes out of the U.S. It's kind of a lot more popular in the U.S. and in pop culture in the U.S. than it is in Britain and Europe. But one of the things I wanted to talk about too is that, a lot of people will say, and I hear this in the U.S., as vast as the U.S. is with all the mountains and all the forest, unexplored, a lot of people will be like, well, how do you have so many unexplained things in Britain? You're on an island. But it's kind of the same as the U.S. Like, you have these big pockets like London where you have all the people, but then out in the country, there's plenty of countryside and stuff in London and forest and all this other stuff.
Even in London, it doesn't take long to get out into the sort of fields and forests, and Britain is like that throughout. So there's a chapter in the book I wrote called "What's with the Habitude," because I kept getting asked about this. Where would anything like this possibly live unseen? How would it not be seen? There's 67 million people in the UK. Surely out of those people, somebody's going to see this. Now, what I discovered when I was researching the book, that there was this great UK national ecosystem assessment that was carried out in 2012, where they were surprised to discover that only 6.8% of the UK's land area could be classified as urban sprawl. And when we broke these figures down with the 4 primary nations, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, it was even less so. So 10.6% of England was built on 1.9% of Scotland, 3.6% of Northern Ireland, 4.1% of Wales, which is
wow.
Actually 93% of the UK means it's not urban.
Right.
Even those areas that comprise the urban settlements, the 10.6% of England, etc., they include rural settlements and roads. So that's within the percentage. I've given this most of the country, and especially a place like Scotland, there is nobody around. And when I was getting out there looking, for things like the British Bigfoot or wherever else, when I was getting out there and just heading off sometimes, off the path into the field, into the forest, it would shock me. And I wouldn't see anybody at all, maybe for hours, maybe for days or so, if at all sometimes. This is tiny Britain, or is it, it's tiny as it appears on the map. I would say
right.
it's not very small if you're walking, but it's small on a map and compared to somewhere like the USA as well. So yes, there's space. Yes, there's food. Yes, there's places things could hide out. It doesn't mean there are things that are undiscovered here. It doesn't mean that these urban legends or this modern folklore, as it is, that's appeared around things like the British Bigfoot and dogmen and Nessie even, have reality, something real behind them. But it certainly shows us that there is an environment that could support them were they here.
Yeah, and like in the U.S. here, we have big cat species and bears and big predators like that. And so one of the things in Britain that would, to me, lend a little more credence, because over here in the U.S., you could say, oh, you saw a black bear or a grizzly bear and it mistaked it for an ape man or your Bigfoot. But in Britain, you really don't have anything like that, as far as the misidentification.
Yeah, monster imposters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any good monster imposters? We don't. We do have some big cats now, clearly, since the 1970s. There seems to have been quite a few releases, and those sightings are they're increasing year on year. But we don't have anything we don't have any bears. We haven't had any since the 1100s. We don't have any wolves. Again, the last died out in the 1700s. We do have some fairly large deer, like red deer. You call them elk, which could really, in the right light, I suppose, be mistaken for a big hairy creature if they're sort of standing up on their back legs and grazing on some of those lower branches in the trees. That's possible, but still, the mistaken identity would come with assuming a deer is a Bigfoot. I mean, this is a person with Bigfoot on the brain to begin with, right? If that's what you're seeing instead of a deer, that subterfuge, that illusion is going to dissipate pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, and most of these people, most of the people that are going to come out and say, I saw this or whatever, they're from that area, so they're going to be familiar with the animals in the area they live in.
Yeah.
And going to kind of have an idea, okay, well, I live in the mountains, there's bears around, and a lot of those people are probably people that don't even come forward because they tell themselves, well, I saw a bear, when really maybe it was a Bigfoot.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I've noticed with a lot of people, with sensible people that have seen something that they can't explain, they will try to tell themselves and you that they saw something else.
Right.
And it's the doubt that makes you investigate further. They've come to you and said, well, maybe I saw this or that, but something very unusual happened. What do you think? And there's something in that. I've had lots of these sightings given to me where essentially the person is desperate for what they've seen to be a Bigfoot or something, or Nessie perhaps. They're desperate for it, and yet there's nothing in the sighting that could really correlate with that. And I've had other sightings given to me, but the person is desperate for it to be something else, but it clearly can't be.
Right.
And they want it to be something else because essentially you're lumbered with the burden now of seeing something you cannot see, and having shared it with the world, what will happen with your life? You can't unshake that rep. Once you're the guy who's seen Bigfoot and told everybody, that's it, you're in for good. You can't step out, right?
Yeah, and especially some of the sightings of like the werewolf dogman type creatures that you hear about, some of them are really terrifying. And so I could see to where somebody would want to say, no, I didn't really see a werewolf or a dogman. Yeah. Like it was something else because it was so terrifying. Yeah,
I agree. And based on most of the belief or the reports that I've believed that I've received about dogmen-like creatures, I wouldn't want to see one either, personally.
Yeah.
It's not on my list, not on my bucket list. I'd be happy to skip that one.
Well, let's get into some of the actual stories that you found around Britain. One of the biggest ones, like you had mentioned earlier, was the Loch Ness monster. Of course, everybody knows about Nessie, but there are some other river monsters, I guess you can call them, all around Britain.
Yeah, sure. There are actually sea serpent and lake monster reports from around Britain's lakes, lochs, and coasts, going back hundreds of years, and lots of modern ones as well. And the thing about Loch Ness is it's kind of a bit of a giant goose chase in a way. Yes, it has the most sightings, but it also has the most cameras, if you will, trained at the loch. And it also has very dark, peaty water that moves in an odd fashion. It's about a mile and a half wide, but it's 750 feet deep. And the wind hits the water as well as the boat traffic, and wakes can last for about 7 or 8 minutes sometimes afterwards. It's really hard to know what you're looking at there. And even if you get into the water, you can't see more than a couple of feet. So it's a really difficult place. But if you stray a little further up to places like Loch Morar, that water is over 1,000 feet deep, and it's crystal clear. There is no peat in that water. It's perfect. And there's many other lochs besides Loch Lochy, Loch Oich, have most likely itinerant Nessie sightings because they're connected to Loch Ness. Moving away from Scotland, you've got places in England like Lake Windermere and the surrounding lakes there, which are allegedly home to Nessie-like creatures as well. And it would make sense to me that there would be other things around the country. If there's a Loch Ness and it's a real creature,
Right.
and they're coming in from the ocean, for example, and they've been endemic here, or they've inhabited this island for however many thousands of years, let's say at least since the time of St. Columba, right? Surely they'd inhabit other bodies of water too. They wouldn't want just this one highland Loch Ness location. Now, Bow Nessie, that was started to be seen quite a lot from 2006. Lake Windermere, it's a lake in the English Lake District in Cumbria, as it's called, and it's connected to many other lakes with monster legends as well. And somebody saw something there, 2006, a photographer called Steve Burnett. He saw this straight line of broken water with 3 humps, 20 feet long, going up the lake. You know, he told his wife, look at that thing over there. You know, the water's not choppy, there's no wind. What's that? There's no motorboats around. Later, another chap, Lyndon Adams, took a picture of the creature about 15 feet in length from a place called Gummershow, which I've stood myself to try to gauge the size of the creature that he saw. And further on from that, people just started seeing things again and again. There was a really famous sighting in 2011 where 2 kayakers were boating on the lake. And it's a real pleasure boating type of lake, by the way. It's very busy. So for there to be any kind of beast there seems to be possible, but still. And they captured this amazing giant dark brown snake-like thing, about 3 cars in length, with ridged humps, almost that classic bumpy, 3-4 humps in the line that you see. And it's just spun out from there. It is quite deep. So it's about 400 feet deep in places, so it could definitely hide something. There is a trout farm at the top of the lake, in the northern part of the lake, where most of the sightings happen, near the River Rothay. So that's a very positive sign as well. That's something you find a lot in Loch Ness. Most of the sightings in Loch Ness are near the river mouths, where a lot of the salmon runs and trout runs come out, and it's the same here in Lake Windermere as well. So it could be. There could be something there that's living in there, a giant eel, perhaps. Who knows? That's always a good go-to, isn't it? Or a huge catfish, or thought to be extinct aquatic lizard from the time of the dinosaurs.
Right. Well, I mean, we're still discovering, especially about deep bodies of water in the oceans and those deep lakes like you're talking about. We're still discovering species we never knew existed. And, everybody likes to cite the coelacanth, but that fossil record is kind of broken. And so that's why they kind of thought it was extinct. And they still haven't filled the fossil record in, but we know they exist.
But what about horseshoe crabs? They're also missing on the record for a long time. And then suddenly, they're alive and kicking, unchanged.
Right.
The same. I just think I used to really get into the scientific thing, especially the fossil record, which I started to realize that you're not really qualified to talk about that. And this is the prevailing paradigm of our time, Andy. So essentially, just skip that and find out what you can evidence-wise about what may still exist, because time and time again, they're having to adjust what they know. And that's normal science. That's the way it's supposed to go, isn't it?
Right.
They find that disproves the old theory, and then give them the chance to adjust it instead of just chopping down their theory. I didn't like the fossil theory simply because, the circular reasoning in the dating and all of that stuff, index fossils to date the rock layer and the rock layer to date the index fossil. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. But philosophically, I know I come from a different place. I'm not, not trying to get embroiled in that kind of thing, other than to say it proves to me that it's all possible, like you were saying, essentially. It's all still up for grabs. As far as I'm concerned, there's a coelacanth, there's horseshoe crabs. It's all still up for grabs as far as thought to be extinct creatures are concerned. That's my view.
Yeah, and to also, like you were saying about Loch Ness, it being so famous and having so many cameras that people kind of go there looking for weird things on the water and that type of stuff. But to have all these other sightings of similar monsters is interesting, because those people they're not there. That's not what they're looking for. Like, they just notice it and take pictures or have this experience of seeing this stuff and that they can't explain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Loch Ness is a strange situation, of course, because it's a huge tourist venue. People go there. The monster is tourism. They get something like 250,000 visitors every single year because that's what they're coming to see. There's nothing else in that area but
Right.
the loch and the possibility of seeing a monster. However, most of the locals you talk to don't believe in it and are quite blasé about saying, well, it's just for the tourists until they see it. 50 years, 60 years of residence, and then suddenly there it is. I don't believe it resides in the loch all the year round. I believe it comes in, it comes out. And I think that really would have to be what is happening. Either it moves into one of the other lochs, like Loch Lochy or Loch Oich, or it leaves completely and goes back to the sea, or they leave completely and go back to the sea and only come back at certain times. Because, yes, there are sightings at different points in the year. The very clear sightings are few and far between, and I really feel that most of what we have as listed sightings are mistaken identity. And very occasionally you get something that is 100% a Nessie.
Yeah, and there are a lot of species. I mean, there's even species of sharks that move into freshwater for food sources and kind of follow fish migration. Then you have certain types of fish that go, even though they live in the ocean, they go breed in freshwater and lay their eggs, and then they,
Yes,
when the young are born, they go back out to sea. So that it definitely could be a possibility and makes a lot of sense.
I think so. I think so. It could really move in. And it's a similar thing with Lake Windermere we're talking about. You have the River Leven, which is a possible ingress from the sea that empties out at the bottom there, at the bottom of Cumbria, back into the Irish Sea. This is a very in Morecambe Bay. So I mean, this is a very very easy, short ingress for the monster to gain access to the lake. It would also explain why there are sightings and why sometimes there aren't sightings. There's another monster in Wales called Teggy, the beast of Llyn Tegid, or Bala Lake as it's called in English. And that's a small lake as well, 4 miles long. However, there is a 12-mile, albeit not simple, route along the River Dee back to the sea. And I wonder sometimes, could that also be an occasional stop off for one of these creatures? Does it swim in when tides are high, when rivers are high, and spend a little time there before conditions are right again to leave and move back out to the sea?
One of the reasons I love talking about cryptozoology is because it's amazing what we don't know about our world. And
Yeah,
we like to think with all the scientists we have and all the exploration over the past 1,000 years that we know so much about our world, but there's so much that we don't know.
yeah.
And with things like these animals that were getting discovered every day, and it's pretty amazing. I know I think it's the bull shark. They just up until like maybe 10 or 20 years ago, scientists would tell you you're crazy. Marine biologists would tell you you're crazy that bull sharks do not go
Yeah.
miles and miles inland, into fresh water.
Oh
And
gosh.
and
They
now,
really, really do.
yeah, and
Yeah.
now they have proof, and that they're like, no, they really do. We don't know, how they change their physiology to deal with the freshwater versus saltwater and all that, but they had to come out and say they do. Like even here in Middle Tennessee where I live, people kept having sightings of mountain lions. And
Mm.
where I live, the mountain lion hasn't been around for quite a long time because this is not really it's a really hilly area, but it's not really mountainous area. You go like East Tennessee toward the East Coast of the U.S., and that's where mountain lions and that type of stuff are. But the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency had to come out last year when somebody got it on their trail cam and say, nope, there's mountain lions in Middle Tennessee now. But they have been denying it for 20 years, even though people have been
Yeah.
seeing them. They kept saying, no, you're seeing bobcats or you're seeing a large dog or, mistaken identity. And they finally had to come out. So it just shows you that even the experts don't always know.
They don't, and it seems to be in their interest, really. I mean, nobody wants to cause a panic, and local governments don't like to have a lot of attention. People running out with guns and things like that to go and hunt or defend or bring back trophies. They want to avoid that. So I think it's a natural governmental or institutional, to, let's say, wildlife departmental reaction to say, no, you've seen something else. That's not what it is. Everybody does it because that's always the first to come back. Now, we've had lots of FOIs here for big cat sightings in local police stations. They're normally quite forthcoming, but obviously they're just repeating the reports that have been given to them, and there are thousands since the late 70s, thousands of reports of black panther-like cats, leopard-like cats, I'm guessing, and pumas all over the country, and they're widespread. They're so regular, so frequent, these sightings, that mostly when I'm giving them now, I just put them in a little pile and ignore them. It just makes no difference. Another sighting for the pile. And yet, there is still no official government acknowledgement that there must be hundreds of big cats roaming around this country
Right.
that have been caught on camera, or caught on film, all kinds of things. And their kills have been seen, their footprints, their scans. It's all there. It's all there. And yet, in a classic, I think, very British governmental way, if saying anything is not going to help you, just say nothing at all. And you just leave it hanging, and you don't have to do anything about it. Inform the public that there could be several hundred possibly dangerous predators from the countryside. And nobody's being killed or anything like that. But on the plus side, there are no large predator species in this country. We've got 30 million sheep, 40 million rabbits. There's game and pheasants and invasive deer and wild boar now, and all kinds of things that they can really prey on without having to resort to people.
Right.
So it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely there will be an attack. There's tastier things on the menu that are easier to catch.
Yeah.
In the British countryside. So maybe that's why we've been okay, more or less.
Where I live, we have bobcats that are they're pretty prevalent, and they're a good sized cat. I mean, they're not as big as like a puma or mountain lion or, something like that, but you rarely ever see them. Like there's we have a huge healthy population, but they're just good at hiding, and they're nocturnal. And so, you don't ever see them. You don't ever see a carcass rarely do you ever see a carcass of a bobcat. Rarely, I think in maybe Tennessee history, there might have been a couple of attacks by bobcats that were, proven to attack humans. But, they typically stay out of humans' way. Like they're secretive. They're cats. They're just like house cats. Like, we don't want your attention. Like, I'm going to go off over here on my own.
They're not interested in us. Exactly. They want to stay away from people. They know people mean trouble. Stay away from humans. That's what you do, But even bears, for the most part, stay away from us, right? If they were intelligent creatures, they wouldn't need to. The obvious advantage would be clear. But for the most part, even bears stay away. Animals stay away from people. I'm not surprised that we don't see these cats more frequently here, actually. I'm not surprised nobody's been able to catch them. But it is a growing problem. I do think it's something that will have to be acknowledged, at least signposted for people. People are out in the countryside all the time. Sooner or later, something will happen. That's just the law of averages.
And I bet if you go out and talk to some farmers, and stuff that have, big sheep population or whatever, I bet you they've seen them. They've probably shot at them because they're picking off their sheep.
Well, there's a lot of dog kills with sheep here. A lot of really reckless dog walkers in the countryside here, and there's a lot of attacks on sheep because of that. Something like 16,000 a year, I think, which seems like a lot until you consider the population is 30 million sheep. Right. So that's perhaps not as much as bigger dent as it would seem. However, I have spoken to farmers who've seen, they described as what seemed like a small version of a panther, something maybe 3 feet long with the tail, maybe the height of, I don't know, like a small collie dog, slinking along, hunting rabbits in a field. One farmer, in fact, was baling hay, and it came so close to him, he said he could have reached out, his hand had just touched it.
Wow.
And it was completely unconcerned. The field he was in was pocked with rabbit warrens, and it was hunting. Yeah. And he'd seen several more living, or darting in and out of hedges on his journeys to and from his land, around the land. He said, well, I've never experienced any problems with them. But I just wanted to know when he spoke to me, have these animals escaped from somewhere, or are they local? I said, well, they're local. They are now. Anyway.
Yeah, and a lot of what we've been talking about with habitat and the prey species and all that stuff, you kind of get into the Bigfoot conversation too, with that of them having the land, and there's prey species for them to eat, and maybe it's just, small pockets of populations. Like here in the US, a lot of Bigfoot researchers believe that it's just small breeding pockets, but and that most people will see them when they're migrating, as opposed to, just living kind of in their own territory. So of course, Bigfoot, Sasquatch is a huge North American type thing, because you get Sasquatch more like Canada, and Bigfoot, Wildman kind of in the United States. So I was surprised to see so many reports about Bigfoot, ape man, Wildman, in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds of reports. I mean, admittedly, they're in the hands of just a few researchers, so that makes things difficult to begin with, because there's not a lot of oversight, or there's less oversight because there's only a few people collecting the reports, and we all have our own biases. We can all decide sometimes erroneously or not whether something really is a strong Bigfoot possibility or not. What I think is a difference now in my new book, Beasts of the World, Volume 1, Hairy Humanoids, which is about the different types of hairy humanoids around the world. I made an attempt to make a simplified, say, physiological differentiation between some of these types. They're not too different to perhaps some of the ones you find in Lauren Coleman's book or Jeff Meldrum's classifications, but it was some extra types added. And I think the difference is that, and I agree with Jeff Meldrum on this, that Bigfoot is probably more like a man-ape, massively built, hair-covered bipedal hominoid, 7 to 9 feet tall, with those big flat feet, the flexible midfoot and mid-tarsal ridge. Whereas perhaps what we have in the UK, if there really is something here, is more caveman-like or Neanderthal-like, more like a wild man. Smaller, 5 to 7 feet in height, perhaps distinctive head hair, often separate to that of the body, with footprints that are more closely matched to a human, except wider and broader. And that would definitely fit with many of the sightings that have been reported here. Not all, but many of them. And some of these carvings we have in our ancient churches and tapestries, noble tapestries of the woodwose. And my theory really, I think, when I started looking at this was, are we now seeing some modern day reports of what essentially adorns all of our cathedrals and noble heraldry? These hairy men from the medieval period, the woodwose, the green man, the forest spirits.
Yeah.
And that was my theory. This is something different. There are other wildman types you find throughout other places in the world, like the Barmano of the Korkal range that Geordie Magrana went in search of near Pakistan and Afghanistan, or the Almasty of the Caucasus Mountains that Merezhin Kaufman and Boris Borshnev and Dmitry Bayanov were looking for in those places, and recording really awesome accounts of that seem more like humanesque, or say Neanderthal-ish, for want of a better word, ape-like creature, somewhere between man and beast.
And to me, that would make sense, because over here with Bigfoot, for the most part, it's mostly like more ape and bigger, like you were talking about. And so it would be like any other animal, any other living creature, where you have different species of the same animal, because they're adapted to different habitats.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, either completely different, but physiologically similar types. Let's say something like the difference between, in appearance anyway, a gorilla and a chimpanzee and an orangutan. Well, of course, we all know that these are all apes, but they are significantly divergent in their appearance to one another. So in the new book, for example, I talk about man-apes, wild men, and then relics like relic apes, like the Yeti or the skunk ape, for example, if that's a real thing, that seem a lot closer, or occupy a position that's closer to true apes, although still, both bipedal and quadrupedal, and having that ape-like divergent medial toe as well, would be useful for arboreal climbing in mountains and rocky slopes and trees and things like that. And then going on to something like the Littlefoot, of which there seems to be two types. One which is more of an ape-like creature, 2.5 feet to 5 feet tall, like the orang pendek, perhaps of Sumatra, or more like a pygmy, proto-pygmy type creature, which could be perhaps a little more human, like the Ebugogo, of Flores, upon which the Homo floresiensis was based upon, or at least was related to, erroneously or otherwise. And I think that this is perhaps what we're looking at. And there's other types as well. In the new book, I've put other types there too. It does become divergent. Monkey monsters and dogmen and amphibious anthropoids. So there's other types. But generally, I've just tried to reclassify or simplify some of these types that have been talked about and say, look, they could be overlapping but similar types, occupying similar regions and areas that we were classifying as one thing, Bigfoot, and yet are somehow different in species to one another.
Yeah, because even our own evolutionary tree, they're still trying to piece together. And so, without getting into the whole thing of fossils and all that stuff again, but
exactly.
Even our own evolutionary tree, so it would just make sense that you would have these different types around the world that have evolved a little more than the others, based on environment and that type of stuff. I mean, that's the working theory of how we came about as humans. And so it would make sense that, and you see evolution in other animals. I mean, Darwin famously with the Galapagos, how different some of those animals are versus, and they're specialized, their habitats and that type of stuff. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Specialization really does have some, I mean, whether you believe in evolution or not, the specialization, or you could say microevolution to satisfy some of the more religious types, is observable. You only have to look at dogs to see that.
Right. I would be totally in the wrong if I didn't ask you about little people and fairy folk, because it's such a huge part of like Irish, Scottish culture.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting to me because I come from, I grew up in Wales actually, and I live in England, but I come from an Irish family originally, and that Celtic side of me, it can't help but sort of want fairies, to be true. There's something about the fairy thing that just, my whole soul wants it to be real. And so in the book, in the Beasts of Britain book, I wrote a little chapter called "The Little People" or the hairy fairy folk, and it was looking at the tales that have persisted for centuries, like about fairies and elves, gnomes, brownies, hobgoblins, papukas, Fenedries, Urisk, all the types, Grogachs, Bubachs, and Trows, and all these different types of fairies that pepper our folklore. Even things like Trows in the Orkney Islands, these little people, or that are similar to the Holder folk, perhaps of Iceland. And I wanted to find out for myself: are these based upon maybe encounters, age-old encounters with diminutive ape-like primates or proto-pygmies, or have we essentially franchised this fairy folklore from Europe during our colonial exploits and spread it throughout the world, which has led to those peoples that we've encountered there sort of ingratiating that tradition into their own and then feeding it back to us as a point of relation, like something you'd see with the Pukwudgie, for example. There's so many aspects of the Pukwudgie that seem European, or the Duende, for instance, which is clearly a very sort of Spanish thing, but it's infected all of Central and South America. You have to wonder, what if we gave it to them when we invaded, and then they gave it back to us later, as a
Right.
fairy tale, and we said, oh, that sounds really interesting. Oh yeah, kind of like our fairies, but it actually is our fairy. So I went down this big route with that, and what I found here at least is there were some modern day sightings of little hairy like figures, people or apes of some kind in the British Isles. Not many, but there were some, and they were very strange.
Yeah, and even I know Irish culture is still a huge thing. They've even moved roads many miles to go around fairy outcroppings. Even in modern day times, they still do things like that because it's so they believe in the fairy folk.
They do. I mean, this is something, like I said, much more common in Iceland, where they literally will move, they will move roads around these creatures. Will move, go all the way around them. But in Ireland, it's more of a business, but it's still a big thing. It exists in common belief, even though people don't believe it, because it's a cultural, folkloric, like telling, if a kid asks you if Santa is real, you say yes without thinking, don't you? And I think it's something akin to that in a place like Ireland, whereas essentially if you say, do you believe in the fairies? You say, of course I believe in the fairies, whether you do or you don't, because it's just kind of polite. It's part of the cultural make-believe that you're part of. So you go with it. I wondered if there's a sort of a digital folklore revival with this thing happening in the modern day, where whatever was once there is now functionally extinct, but our interest in all of these emanations of the fairy folk has turned into podcasts and social media groups and websites and toys and tours more than anything else as well. Especially, there was that whole Duende spate of YouTube clips in the noughties. Do you remember that? There's always some teenagers playing football or in their garden, and the next thing you know, a little Duende runs across just out of shot, and everybody screams and runs away. That was the big Duende thing back then. Oh, right now you've got people like there's a guy called Pat Noon in Ireland who has a fairy whisperer. He's a fairy whisperer. He's got a fairy farm, with fairy forts and healing fairy tours in Galway. And, you go and you pay your money and you get a week of fairies, where it's essentially, you're walking around these little huts that he's built probably on the land in these special stones and paying to the nose for it. But you get to feel good and you have a nice time and off you go with your fairy experience.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, especially like you said, how it's come back into pop culture and it's so popular nowadays. Another thing that you wrote pretty extensively about that I find, for whatever reason, I've always been fascinated by this, and I just talked to a guest on my Christmas special holiday episode, Sylvia Schultz. But one of the things I read in her book, and I'm born on Christmas, so that's where I'm going with this.
Oh, wow.
One of the beliefs is if you're born on Christmas, on December 25th, that you're a werewolf.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and so for whatever reason, I've always been fascinated by the werewolf stories, and now modern day, it's more into like the dogman type stuff you hear a lot about. But it's kind of making a big resurgence, and I wonder if that's like you were saying. I know there's some people out there I've seen that are credible, frightening reports that they've had with like dogman, werewolf type creatures, but it's so ingrained in the history of like Europe and that area of the world where we get werewolf lore and the lichen lore and all that stuff from to begin with. But I wonder if it's just making a resurgence, kind of like the fairy stuff is.
I think so, and just in the few years that I've been kind of taking this cryptozoology thing serious, or doing it like career cryptozoology. I always joke about it. Not that I've ever made any money, but that kind of, when I've been doing it seriously for the last my job of passion for the last few years, I've seen a few movements. So the Bigfoot thing was, and especially the UK, which is a small place, the Bigfoot thing was kind of big, and then the same people kind of switched to dogmen overnight, and then there were a few claim sightings, and then those kind of people now seem to have switched out to this rake thing. And I think there are trends, and unfortunately, when you've got podcasts or blogs or things to sell, you're likely to follow them, right? That's just something that's going to happen. But there is something curious about this dogman phenomenon, and I can't believe in it as a real creature in the sense of an actual upright canine that that walks about on two legs and does all of these amazing supernatural things. But I can perhaps believe in it as a type of now rare, albeit extinct, nearly extinct or functionally extinct form of giant monkey. Something similar to the Kradan of Tibet or the Iznachi of South America. Could there have been a wider dispersion of these giant monkey types in ancient times that are now functionally extinct in places like Europe and North America? And by that I mean, there are individuals or small populations, but they don't really exist as a functioning species anymore. And could those sightings of these giant monkeys have led to the werewolf legends? And could we be seeing occasionally, one of their stray surviving members from time to time in the modern day?
Yeah, and in the U.S., I think it kind of started. I wonder if this kind of kicked off the dogman stuff in Europe too. But I kind of looking at just the paranormal and researching all that stuff. I think the Beast of Bray Road, when that stuff came out, the book, the newspaper article, then the book, and then the documentaries, I think that kind of is what kicked it into high gear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Linda's a fantastic writer as well. So, the way she framed that, I mean, not framed it, but the way she reported on it, it was fascinating. And you get, and I notice this a lot in the United States, you get a specific cryptid to occupy an area, and the area becomes popular. And a festival appears out of Normally the area is kind of very rural, but like Loch Ness, there's not a lot of other stuff going on, and it turns into an industry, of course. And why not? We all like these ghost houses. We all like going to look at areas that have mysterious significance or happenings. It's a fun thing. It doesn't mean they didn't happen and they're not real. One of the things I was interested in with the Beast of Bray Road, actually, is the wolf population in this area. And one of the things I looked at, because I do report on this in my new book as well, Wisconsin's wolf problem. So they estimated in 2019 there was 1,000 individuals, 1,000 different individual wolves in Wisconsin, and a lot of the farmers and local people were demanding the hunting quota be doubled from 150 to 300 individuals. I think it was, by the way, afterwards. And it was approved in 2021. But unfortunately, the Chippewa Nation people had a legal right to claim half of the number, but they refused to hunt the wolf because it's sacred. It's seen as a brother. So with that in mind, it's unlikely that their population will see a decline. And I'm wondering, these incidences that people are having, seeing more and more wolves, or the Beast of Bray Road, for instance, is this because of the wolf problem? Are they seeing an individual that's particularly vicious or outsized or overgrown and behaving in a strange way because of this massive population where it's seeking out other prey, or like the Beast of Bray Road was eating something at the side of the road, wasn't it? Or preying upon carrion. And is this what's happening here? And it just seemed that's that kind of situation to me. That's what I was looking for. Well, okay, what's the local situation like? Okay, they've got a massive wolf problem. The local Indians won't hunt them, and their quota is really low. So what happens when a species like this is overrepresented? They start hunting in unusual ways and behaving strangely, or interacting with humans more. Is this the source of that sighting? Maybe not.
Yeah. And then you also have, I mean, with all of these, all the cryptids and the cryptozoology, you have two different camps that I've seen. You have one camp that believes they're all physical beings. And then you have another camp that's they're all supernatural. And they come from some other dimension or some other supernatural realm. And I find that debate interesting too. And one of the things I liked about the book and about you as an author and how you approached this was approaching it from, could it be these things, you know, the way that you talk about the stuff, that not just definitive. I've just seen other people in the cryptozoology world that are very definitive, you know, especially Bigfooters, they tend to be
Yeah,
very,
well, yeah. I mean, that's a dividing lines, right? I mean,
yeah,
warring camps of Bigfoot. There used to be a whole conflict here with the woo. You know, remember the woo? So that was a sort of a supernatural Bigfoot type of belief that was around. The one thing that really helps me with this is that I come from a very religious background, but then I also studied religion as my degree, and with that you study lots of religions. And then when I got married, I married somebody from a different religion and spent a lot of time in their country. And what normally happens when you do that is you start to see how your religious perspective dominates your perception, and how somebody else's works in an alternate way to yours. And then you can apply that to everything you see. So when I look at cryptozoology, and especially the theoretical camps or the philosophical camps, you can see that this is religious perspective defining their perception of what they're looking at. It doesn't mean that what they've come up with is wrong, though. It could be right. It just means outside of that perspective, they can see nothing. And I've been that person, you know, in a lot of respects. So I look at it and say, okay, so that's that religious camp, and that's this religious camp. And what can I take from both of the camps that might be actually true and applicable to this genre? And then, you know, backpedaling after that on what, for my own dominating philosophy, is imposing itself on my theories, you know. And I try my best to not let that overwhelm me. Of course, sometimes I fail, but because we all want to think what we want to think, right?
Right.
We want to be right. Yeah. So that's it. We're in different religious camps, and we have to try to get out of it now and again and see what the actual truth of the situation might be.
Right. Right. And that's, I mean, I've talked about that on the show with quite a few guests about how we like to put things in boxes in our own little worlds, and we're comfortable with everything inside that box. And so it's easy to kind of shoehorn yourself into one opinion. My biggest thing is that I try to keep the opinion of, I don't know. I can't prove any of this stuff, so I can't tell you what to believe. And I'm not, and I like to have guests like you on that, we're not on here trying to tell any of the listeners what to believe. It's just, these are different points of view about these different phenomena. And it doesn't mean that, I believe in a lot of the paranormal stuff because I've experienced lots of stuff. But at the same time, a lot of the stuff I don't know. That's why I love doing this show, because I can, deep dive with people like you and see different points of view other than and it opens up my mind to think, okay, well, maybe I put this in a box and I need to rethink it.
Absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree with you there. I mean, my personal opinion, perspective on myself is that I've been wrong before, and I'll probably be wrong again. And I'm okay with that. I'm not going to defend the position if it's patently wrong. I'll say, okay, well, look, thank you. And thank you for pointing this out. Now I can go back and say, actually, I was totally wrong about that. And here's the new stuff. People have contacted me since the first book came out and saying, you know what, you reported on this this creature or that creature. Well, actually, the detail was this, or the detail was that. Oh, it came out that it was a fake, and this is the evidence. And retract it, take it away, change it. Never be embarrassed to say that you're wrong. And if people want to punish you for that, that's their own deal. That's their own business. You have to be part of it.
Yeah. I think for me, I kind of go instead of just believing everything, I kind of go the route of being skeptical about absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And so that's sometimes to a fault as well. Like, where I have to admit, maybe it is something paranormal, maybe I'm being too harsh and, brutal, because I can't tell them, I can't tell somebody they're wrong because of their experience. The same as I don't want anybody telling me I'm wrong for my experiences and my thoughts on the paranormal. And so, I got to kind of reel it in sometimes on social media and even here on the podcast sometimes.
Yeah.
And to say that, I don't know. None of us know. This is not something we can prove. The one thing I can tell you for sure with absolute certainty is there's no such thing as an expert in the paranormal.
Exactly. And, the one thing I seem to be realizing the older I get is that there are no experts. Everybody's just trying to muddle through. I mean, of course, there are people that know a lot about a subject and that have learned what there is to know, but everybody's still kind of muddling through. Even at the top of the scientific, pinnacle, those guys are saying, gosh, I hope that theory I just threw out there doesn't get too exposed before I have a chance to rectify all the mistakes I've made. This thing for me, talking about the paranormal side again, the reason I've stayed away from it in cryptozoology is there's one very important reason. One, my focus has always been the discovery of unknown or thought to be extinct animals. So that's what I'm looking for, is animals.
Right.
And two, essentially, once it's paranormal, it's outside of the realm of what I'm doing. So I have to strike it off my list. So I try to do everything I possibly can to see if there is any validity to its physical, being. Yeah. Instead of, this is a ghostly apparition, and now where am I? Well, okay, how do I capture a ghostly apparition? I mean, and prove that it exists. I don't know anything about that. I'm sure there's people that could tell me, but still, that's outside of the realm. If somebody's reporting to me that there's an unidentified species of deer roaming around the Cotswolds somewhere, my first impression, just because I can't seem to find her, it seems to disappear easily into the undergrowth, shouldn't be that it's a ghost. Right. It's an unknown species of deer. I should try and, it's reported as an animal, is what I'm saying, or animal-like. So I need to establish that identity first before I go any further and put it perhaps into the realm of the supernatural.
The only, and I'm just going to say this real quick because we could talk about what I'm fixing to say. We could probably talk about for a whole nother hour. But one of the only theories that, for me personally, that I've heard that made sense for it to be something supernatural with the cryptids, with Bigfoot, specifically Bigfoot is the example that he used. But I talked to a gentleman about time slips, and that was his theory, was that maybe Bigfoot, when people see Bigfoot and he just all of a sudden disappears and seems to have these supernatural abilities, and even maybe some of these other cryptids, maybe we're just seeing a time slip of Bigfoot, back in the day when Cro-Magnon man and cavemen and all this stuff roamed. Uh-huh. Maybe we're just seeing a slip in time, and we're actually seeing, 5,000 years in the past or more or whatever. And that made sense to me that, okay, well, if it is something supernatural, that's the best supernatural explanation that I've heard, is that maybe a lot of the stuff is just, we're seeing back in time 1 million years for whatever reason. There's a time slip.
Do you remember that pinhole? Remember you making pinhole cameras when you were a kid, right?
Yeah.
You remember that? Do you ever remember that pinhole camera explanation for ghostly apparitions, for ghosts that walk a trail, like a headless horseman or a grey lady that walks through a castle, on certain nights or when certain conditions are present over a period of time, again and again and again. It was explained to me once that essentially, the castle or the room or the atmosphere captured that moment, and it is recreated when the atmosphere for conditions are recreated within the castle or the route that the ghost walks. So you are essentially seeing a film, a replay of something that's being filmed within the room. That kind of aspect I would agree with, and say, well, that's possible. Perhaps maybe the atmospheric conditions in the forest were apt to record that incident and replay it when the conditions were replayed in the modern day. But I generally think when we make very special excuses, not excuses, but reasons or get out of jail free cards to explain losing a Bigfoot out in the open, it's more that we can't, our minds can't really cope with not being able to discover a creature that's so adept at hiding.
Right.
So we give it a portal or a, time slip or whatever else to explain how it got away, That's just my own two cents, anyway.
Yeah, I typically, I lean towards 90% lean towards that, Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature, and some of the other cryptids as well. Like we've been talking about today with, the Loch Ness monster and those type, I typically lean towards it's some kind of flesh and blood creature. I just thought it was just the best explanation that I'd heard for the supernatural explanation.
I think it's pretty good. And again, it would explain a lot.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah. Well, and to me, even because I've been researching mainly hauntings and ghosts and that type of stuff has kind of been my forte for the past 25 years. And so the whole time slip thing makes a lot of sense for a lot of the paranormal, especially on the ghost side of things for me. With like you're talking about what they call the stone tape theory.
Tape. That's it. Okay.
Yeah, that kind of records like a cassette or a VHS tape, the way you can magnetically record on those. Something can record on the environment. But I've also had lots of experiences with intelligent things that I can't explain either, even in my own house. And so I know that, especially like over in Britain, and y'all, we have 200 years of history. Y'all have thousands of years of history and hauntings.
I mean, just the little house I'm in right now is built in the early 1800s, I think, and it's not particularly old. I think the one I grew up in was about 300 years old.
Right.
And even that wasn't like a stonkingly old house. It was just like, it was just kind of, had age. Absolutely, I know where you're going with that, and I think a lot happens, and maybe as you say with the stone tape theory, many things can be recorded over time, but also being a religious person, I do believe in the supernatural. There actually being a supernatural of a type, and I believe that actual personalities, good or bad, can be contacted and things like that. So not really taking that out of the equation at all, just saying perhaps these are two separate things. As far as the history and the ghost hauntings and things like that, I think you would love it over here. There just seems to be an endless supply, especially around London, of places you can go to do that kind of thing. And, you might even just end up renting somewhere really old accidentally and find you've got something on hand. Yeah.
I love all the paranormal, because I think the more I dive into it on the show here and talking to different people, even though you come from the cryptozoology world for the most part, and I'll talk to somebody else who's, from the paranormal ghost part of the paranormal, it's all somehow connected in some way, because everything in our world is connected. Whether Bigfoot is supernatural or not, it's still connected because it's all under the umbrella of paranormal, because it's stuff that we can't explain.
Yeah.
And so I just find it all fascinating. And that's one of the reasons I love doing this show, is because I get to dive into things other than ghosts. Don't get me wrong, I love talking to people about ghosts, and I could talk about ghosts for 8 hours. But because that's just been my interest, but also to talk to people like you with the cryptozoology and learn things that I didn't know around the world, and dive into these other aspects. It's just I have so much fun with this.
I personally, I love it. And it's been a sort of a funny, hard road, because, you get involved, as the paranormal side, in all these early battles, and you don't know to save yourself yet. At that point, you're fighting your corner, or your philosophical corner a lot. And I did that in the beginning. Also coming from a sort of a musician's background where things could be really catty. My experience was at the beginning that if somebody sort of messed with you online, you just burned them to the ground in front of everybody, and that's how you got out of it. And that didn't help with making friends and things at the start. So I sort of changed that routine a little bit, and now I'm feeling a little more live and let live, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is working out better, surprisingly. But it's just one of those things. It's an interesting world, regardless of your perspective. And I think, for me personally anyway, looking at this new book series, so Hairy Humanoids is the first one, looked around the world at different types. The second volume is about something completely different, and there's 7 volumes in total, which I've laid out the skeleton for, actually, of this Beast of the World series. And I'm really excited to really get into what else there is around the world in every classification, these different animals. Within the next, I suppose they'll all be finished within the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah, it's exciting. Let's just get in there and find out. Everybody needs to just, especially now with everything that's happening in the world, get passionate about something, forget
Right.
what's going on outside your front door, in society, and just dig deep and find something joyous and passionate to take up your life.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's why I started this show back at the beginning of 2020, and 70 something episodes in, and it's going well.
Wow.
And so I'll continue to do it. I enjoy it. Yeah, we're halfway through season 2 right now. So,
Cool.
I'll hit another 50 episodes for season 2 and then take a couple months off and then come back with season 3. Yeah. Just so much fun. And like you said, like you were talking about earlier, where you decided I'm just going to do what makes me happy and do the cryptozoology thing and write the book. And I'm working on a book myself. And I've kind of taken that approach too. I know you worked in the medical field. After being 20 years in the medical field, just had enough of it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I'm just like, yeah, it's time for me to do what makes me happy.
Yeah. I mean, I dove back into the field there at the beginning of that whole pandemic thing, but I was already pretty much done. I was pretty much done when I started writing the book, because London's just got that life. I'm a very polite, easygoing person, but when you're rushing and you're a 3-hour commute into central London early in the morning, and you're actually considering, pushing the person who's standing on the left side instead of the right down the steps of the escalator, because they've broken the London rules, you have to sort of start to, check yourself and think, well, actually, hey, is this stuff getting to me? Well, look, I was happy to be able to take a break out. Not everybody can do it, and we've worked hard to have that break. But yeah, here we are. Everybody now has a different slant on the world, a different view on the world these last 2 years. And yeah, I just advise everybody, if you can, and take care of your responsibilities at the same time, get out there and do something passionate.
Yeah, do something you love. And if you're listening to the show, you probably have a love of the paranormal. By all means, go out, and even if you're not a serious investigator, go have fun at the events to support these historic locations and that type of stuff, and just go have fun with it. And if you've never been on one, go on one. Do it. 2022 is your time to do it. And if you need an event to go on, you live in my area, I do plenty of them throughout the year. So
awesome.
Yeah, and we try to do them for cheap so people can afford them and come out and have a good time.
Oh,
but
good.
Andy, I thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's been simple, like talking to an old friend. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I love. Just a normal conversation. And everybody go check out Andy's book, Beast of Britain. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and at his website, beastofbritain.com. Also, some other good stuff on the website at beastofbritain.com. And go hit subscribe on his YouTube channel, Beast of Britain. He does his own video podcast up there that has a great guest on there talking about all different subjects as well. And they can also find you on all the social media if they want to see what you have going on. And Beast of Britain is on social media as well, on Facebook.
Yep. I'm on all of the social media, Facebook and Instagram mainly. You can contact me on Facebook. I'm always happy to chat there, or Instagram. Just a really quick in as well. Beasts of the World Volume 1 should be arriving at the end of January. So look out for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll look forward to checking that out. Thank you again, Andy. Everybody out there, stay safe. Have a good day. We'll see you next time. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
You have come to the end of the line. Whoa. And I can feel you as you pass the other side.